charts, they would all look basically like this. Okay, so overall, what do these results tell us? They provide strong support for the business case for diversity perspective, and these results are consistent with all of the hypotheses, and they suggest that racial diversity is related to business outcomes. It tells us that, consistent with each of these four hypotheses that we were discussing, that racial diversity has a great, increases business organization sales revenues, number of customers, market share, and relative profitability. And when we looked at gender diversity, it was the same pattern with the exception of it not having a statistically significant effect on market share. But for three of these other four kinds of factors, gender diversity also had that effect net of racial diversity. Okay? And so this suggests to us that the results are fully consistent with the business case for diversity thesis. Okay. But now what I want to do is I want to take a step back to say, yes, so there is a case to be made that diversity does in fact improve outcomes for business organizations. But I want to suggest to you that that is not the only reason that we should in fact be embracing diversity. And in fact, I want us all to ask ourselves, but what if I had done this analysis or someone else had done this analysis and these numbers didn't turn out this way, then what? Should we then reject diversity? Should we then not try to embrace diversity? Is the business case the reason that we should be embracing diversity? I would suggest to us that the answer to that should be no. That indeed what we need to do is we need to look at other issues and other bases for diversity. And I would suggest to you that what we need to do is in fact start moving towards what I'm calling the critical case for diversity, and that is to talk about a critical diversity. And we often hear people having discussions about who all should be included under the umbrella of diversity. And so this is part of the dialogue that I'd like to start now, is to say that there is nothing intrinsically wrong with including any group under the banner of diversity. There is nothing wrong with that. But it is tricky, because in doing so, it makes no differentiation between those who have traditionally been excluded and those who have usually had privilege. So it does not really serve the interest of those who have been excluded by using this umbrella notion of let 1,000 flowers bloom, let's include everyone, because it doesn't acknowledge that there are some who are privileged and others who are not. And indeed, if we use just that logic, it might in fact reinforce the privileges of the privileged to the detriment of those who have been disadvantaged. And in fact, I have served on various committees, and I'll just share a story coming from my own university in which I was serving on yet another diversity committee. And my university is one that has middle class, working class, and some poor students. And it is ethnically and racially diverse, prides itself on that. And one person on this committee said, yes, our university needs more diversity, and so we should have a campaign to bring in more wealthy white males to be more inclusive. And so I'm saying to you that you actually can have this notion of inclusivity meaning just about anything to anyone. And so for that reason, I'm saying to you that we need to examine the concept more critically. And here, critical, I'm using as a term to mean two different things: of essential importance and of or pertaining to critics or criticism. I would suggest to you that critical diversity confronts issues of oppression and stratification that revolve around issues of diversity. It includes an analysis of exclusion, discrimination, and it challenges hegemonic notions of colorblindness and meritocracy. Critical diversity is in stark contrast to other notions of diversity, such as colorblind diversity. Colorblind diversity is one that says, well, we shouldn't really pay attention to things like race and ethnicity. We should all just acknowledge that we're different and move forward. It also challenges notions of segregated diversity. What do I mean by segregated diversity? It is the idea that, and I'll pick on is probably the wrong expression. I will point to an example from a vaunted institution in American society that prides itself on being highly diverse. That is the U.S. military, right? Very progressive and integrated, and traditionally has included, well, I was going to say men and women of all colors. Well, mostly men and increasingly women. But the military, we can look at it empirically and we can see that it is an institution that, while it is very racially and ethnically diverse, looks very different at the top than it does at the bottom. It is very dark at the bottom and it is very light at the top. And some would say that this is due to there being segregation within this very diverse institution. You also get the idea that when we're talking about diversity within the military, there appear to be some contradictions. Until recently, we had a military that was saying that we don't have people that we can waste. And yet, within this diverse institution, which example do I want to use? Do I want to use the one of no women in combat missions and therefore very difficult for them to get to the rank of general? No, let's not use that example. Let's use the example of don't ask, don't tell. That is, you have an institution that says we embrace diversity, but we cannot, until recently, we cannot have people who identify as gay or lesbian among our ranks. And so that questions just how much that institution truly embraces diversity. And so I would just put that out there to say there are still some issues that we need to confront when we're talking about the notion of diversity. And I'm saying that we need to move towards a more critical concept. But how do we make diversity a more critical concept? And how do we know who should be included? I suggest to you that for diversity to become a more critical concept, it must be tethered to other concepts such as equity, parity, and opportunity. And indeed, the notion is that if we actually do believe a couple of things, if we believe that talent is normally distributed across all kinds of groups and that it is equally distributed, that intelligence can come in any color, gender, sexuality, etc., and that if there are, let me just pull a number out, if there are 10% of the people who are talented and able, that 10% will hold true among African Americans, Latinos, Asians, whites, Alouettes, etc., right? And that 10% of gays, 10% of straights, 10% of men, 10% of women, etc., will in fact be talented and able. And so for that reason, if we believe that talent and ability is equally distributed across these groups, then we should have some kind of proportional representation, unless that statement or that claim is not true to begin with, or unless there is some kind of self-selection that precludes people from wanting to be within certain organizations, or unless there is discrimination at some point along the way. And so what I'm saying to us is this: for us to get to the point of diversity actually having the kinds of payoff that we wanted to have as a nation, as a society, and within our organizations, it does in fact need to be tethered to these other kinds of concepts. I would also suggest to you that when we are having discussions about diversity, and if we are trying to make it a critical concept, it must be bounded. By that I mean, again, this notion that we are not just saying it, of course we wanted to include everyone, but we need to pay a special attention to those groups and people from those groups who have been systematically excluded and denied opportunity. Because it's one thing to say, well, we want to have representation from left-handers, but if left-handers haven't been systematically excluded, there's no particular reason for us to expend energy and resources to make sure that they are included, if in fact we have no evidence that they have ever been excluded. Sorry, I didn't mean to pick on left-handers, but I think you get the point. And so it has to have some boundaries and limits, or else we have to ask ourselves, how does it stop? When does it stop? And if we don't put limits on it,